Hey ladies, messy hair don't care. I'm excited for this video for a couple reasons. Got my messy bun. We're gonna do this thing. Number one, there's some amazing just truths in these scriptures that I could spend hours talking about, but I'm gonna just highlight my favorite few. And number two, today's reading started with Isaiah chapter 40, and we're finally in the portion of the book that's a book of comfort. Remember in the very first video, I mentioned how Isaiah split into two parts, the book of judgment and the book of comfort. Well, we've been in the book of judgment and it's felt really heavy. And now we're finally starting the book of comfort. And I'm just excited for that because it's been a lot. It's been pretty heavy stuff. So what stood out to me in this week's reading? Whew! I don't know how I'm going to ever summarize this. Let's start in the very first chapter we read this week, Isaiah chapter 30. Right off the bat, it talks about the alliance that Judah made with Egypt because of how Assyria was encroaching upon their kingdom. Remember, Israel split into two parts, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. The northern kingdom is Israel, and that has already been overtaken by Assyria. And the southern kingdom is Judah. And they're feeling the pressure of Assyria pressing in on them. And so they make a partnership with Egypt. And this is done under King Hezekiah's reign, which we'll talk about in a little bit. That was at the end of our reading. But Isaiah is already speaking to that in chapter 30. He says, woe to you, obstinate children, declares the Lord, to those who carry out plans that are not mine, forming an alliance, but not by my spirit, heaping sin upon sin. How often do we make decisions that are not led by God's Spirit? And we just heap one sin upon another sin, and in desperation do what we think is wise by asking other people for advice, by trusting in our own power, instead of actually taking the time to seek His Spirit and His voice to guide us in our decisions, instead of trusting in the power of God. And that's exactly what was happening with the people of Judah. They were trusting in the powers of Egypt, making an alliance with Egypt. And Isaiah was calling them out for that. Isaiah was saying, God's judgment is coming. You should be trusting in Him, not in man-made things. And the rebellious people got very upset after a while with Isaiah's teachings. And so we see in verse 10, they say to the seers, see no more visions. And to the prophets, the people said, give us no more visions of what's right. Tell us pleasant things. Prophesy illusions. Leave this way, get off the path, and stop confronting us with the Holy One of Israel. They were like, enough of your God talk. Just leave us alone. Tell us good things. Tell us things that are nice to hear. And I can't help but think with Easter approaching, how many Christians have that attitude. All the TV advertisements and, commercials that you see about Easter and like picking out your Sunday best, you're going to get this whole swarm of people coming to the church that don't normally attend. And I think it puts a lot of pressure on pastors to tell them what they want to hear. I think a lot of pastors fear being too honest and too truthful with the weight of the gospel, and instead give this soft, fluffy version of the gospel on Easter Sunday, so that way people will come back. So you don't make them feel bad in their nice, pretty, Sunday best when they're all dressed up on Easter with their family. And so pastors will kind of tell them nice things about how they're loved and welcomed, and ignore the weight of the truth that is the gospel, the weight of the reality that we are sinners and Christ had to die, take on our death on our behalf so He could overcome and bring us life so that we could have life, and not just life eternal, but life in the here and now. That Jesus didn't just save us from something, He saved us for something. Because that's the truth of the gospel. This isn't just, okay, believe in Jesus and go to heaven and now it's like all done. No, it demands change in the here and now. He's saving us from death and giving us a transformed life here and now. And that requires change, and that's hard to hear. And sometimes we skirt around that when we're trying not to offend people. And so I just hope and pray that pastors would be bold in actually giving the truth of God's word on Easter Sunday, and not just the pleasantries of what people want to hear, because this was the attitude of the people in Judah, and Isaiah was calling them out for it. In fact, he not only called out them for having this attitude of wanting pleasantries, but he also called them out for being complacent, that he has warned them and they're being complacent about it. And he speaks directly in Isaiah chapter 32 to the women of Jerusalem. He says, "You women are so complacent. Rise up and listen to me." I think it's easy to think that apathy is just this 21st century problem, that our entertainment saturated society and, our modern conveniences make us kind of lazy. But the reality is it's an issue of the heart. And, being lazy once in a while might look like hitting your snooze button a few too many times in the morning. I know I'm guilty of that. And when I say a few too many times, I mean it. I'm sure I'm not the only one who hits it more than once. Ask my husband Joseph, it's made us late on quite a few occasions. But when the attitude of your comfy, cozy bed, when that kind of shifts into the rest of your life, and you just try and surround yourself by things that make you comfortable, then you take on an apathetic and lazy attitude when it comes to actually doing the hard work of reality, of facing the truth and doing something about it. And that was the attitude of the women in Jerusalem. He said, "Rise up and listen to me." I mean, literally, wake up instead of sleeping in the comfort of the security of your riches. Those things are going to fail you. They're going to disappoint you. Trust in the Lord and do something about it. And so that was a word to the women of Jerusalem. And it's a word to us today, ladies. It says in Isaiah 33 that the Lord is our strength every morning. Like I mentioned, I'm not a morning person. I like to hit snooze at my alarm clock, and I need to be reminded that my strength is not in me, but that's in God. And so I love that verse in Isaiah 33, verse 2. In fact, that should probably go in my bedroom. We already have the psalm that says, "Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love," hanging above our bed. And I think I need "be our strength every morning," like above my door frame as well. Isaiah 36 is where King Hezekiah's reign begins to be explained. And he was a godly king. He did a lot of things right. And 2 Kings 18 verse 5 actually gives just a nice comprehensive verse that just honors him and his reign, and says that he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. Hezekiah trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel. There was no one like him among all the kings of Judah, either before him or after him. He held fast to the Lord and did not cease to follow him. He kept the commands of the Lord had given Moses. So from that you'd think, wow, he's like the perfect king and he did everything right. And that is not true. He was still human and he still made mistakes. And one of the mistakes that he made was making an alliance with Egypt when he felt the pressure of Assyria encroaching on Judah. So Hezekiah made this treaty. He shouldn't have done that. He should have gone to the Lord. But we see that the Lord still saves and rescues the people of Judah, just as Isaiah had prophesied that they were not going to fall to Assyria. And basically, King Hezekiah should have just trusted that. But instead it gets really confusing, and the Assyrians play all these mind games, and we see that they sent a messenger in chapter 36, verse 4, to tell Hezekiah, basically, this is what the great king says, on what are you basing this confidence of yours? You speak only empty words. You say to me, we're depending on the Lord our God. But isn't he the one whose high places and altars Hezekiah removed, saying to Judah and Jerusalem, you must worship before this altar? And so they're confused because they didn't realize that Hezekiah was actually following God by destroying the altars in the high places and by having everybody worship the one true God in the central location of Jerusalem. They're saying that that's wrong, that they're like that. So Assyria is making the judgment that King Hezekiah has turned his back against their gods because, he turned his back against the false gods. So it's very confusing here. Like there's kind of these mind games. You can tell that they're trying to kind of negotiate and talk about their power and understand, kind of mock King Hezekiah's trust in God, but they don't really understand what God he's trusting in. So it just gets kind of confusing here. And it reminds me of modern politics and the way that gods talked about today? Like, what God are they talking about? And it's just confusing trying to be politically correct. So then it gets even more confusing because in verse 10, the Assyrians claim that God is actually behind them. And so they say, you think that your Lord is behind you, but the Lord himself told me to march against the country and destroy it. So now they're claiming that God is behind them. But in Isaiah chapter 37, we see that the Lord comes through for the people of Judah, and he actually puts to death 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp. And so they end up turning around and returning to Nineveh and staying there. It's because King Hezekiah, he goes to the Lord in prayer. In chapter 37, we see Hezekiah's prayer, verses 14 to 20. Now, O Lord our God, deliver us from his hand so that all the kingdoms on earth may know that you alone, O Lord, are our God. Hezekiah's prayer is of such pure intent. It's not for him to be, a king with all this mighty valor who's overcome his enemies, but it's that God would truly be honored. And so God honors his pure devotion to him, and we see that he comes through just as he said he would. And then we see another one of Hezekiah's prayers being answered in chapter 38. So after this whole Syrian crisis passes, Hezekiah gets really sick, and he's going to die, and he's told he's going to die by Isaiah, but then he prays, and Isaiah says that the Lord has heard your prayer and seen your tears, and that the Lord says, I will add 15 years to your life. And so we see such evidence of answered prayer in Hezekiah's life, that even when he made the wrong decision, even when he didn't trust God, when he turned to him in prayer, in a prayer of pure devotion, God answered that prayer. When his life was about to end, he prayed another radical prayer, and God answered that prayer. God answers our prayer, and we don't have to be perfect people. We just have to come to him in humility and know that he has the power to change our lives. And that's exactly what King Hezekiah did. And then he praises him in the end of chapter 38, and that's really beautiful. I encourage you to read that portion as well. Although up to the point of his death, King Hezekiah is still making mistakes. We see that he showed the people of Babylon all of his treasures. And I don't know if it was out of kind of bragging about look how much treasure I have in my kingdom. But Isaiah kind of called him out for that and said, well, now the Babylonians are going to take everything that you have, and predicts the victory of Babylon. That is the end of our portion of Isaiah. Uncle Ken thinks he's going to be so sneaky in the background. We see you. All right. Well, the last thing I have to do is try and recite the portion of Isaiah that I memorized, Isaiah 53. All right. So let's wrap up by saying Isaiah 53. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a root out of He grew up before him like a tender shoot, like a root out of dry ground. There was no beauty or majesty that attracted us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering, familiar with pain. He was like one from whom people hid their faces. He was despised and held in low esteem. This is a lot harder for me to memorize than the Beatitudes were. So I know I've got to work hard, but I'm working on it. And I hope that you appreciate reading through the Book of Comfort this week. Keep writing His Word across your heart.